I hereby call to order this meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee on January 31st, 2024 at 7 p.m. I'm Linda Lukowski, Chair of the School Committee. I want to welcome everybody here tonight. A reminder that this meeting is being audio and video recorded. I'm going to read our vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? The next item is oral communications from the public. Members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. The agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the committee? Seeing none. The appointment of the Director of Finance and Operations, Kyle Warren, Triton's current Director of Finance and Operation, has sadly resigned. The superintendent has been searching for a new Director of Finance and Operations to start as soon as possible after Kyle's departure. One of the school committee's responsibilities is to appoint the district business manager, a role for which we use the title of Director of Finance and Operation on the superintendent's recommendation. Brian is going to introduce the candidate that he is recommending.
So while he is coming up, I would like to introduce to you Brian Perry. Brian, I won't go into a lot of detail. You have seen his materials. You have a draft contract in front of you. I think those speak for themselves. But Brian's most recent experience has been from the public sector as the city auditor for the city of Lowell, and then most recently in the town of Wilmington as the finance director / accountant. So we've had several interviews with Brian and the team, the leadership team, and he brings a lot to the table. I think we've had lots of discussions. There are many facets of this job. And certainly the one that we keep talking about is the importance of being the finance director, right? Obviously, the role is Director of Finance and Operations. We have an incredible operations staff and finance staff, but most importantly, we know that where we can get into trouble is in the finances. So Brian brings a breadth of experience. I'm excited to have him start. As you know, as Linda mentioned, it's your appointment based upon my recommendation. And so obviously I am recommending to you tonight to allow me to execute a contract with Brian. Certainly not necessarily an interview, but if you have any questions for him, I don't know, did you want to say anything? Did you have any prepared statements or?
I don't have anything prepared, but I appreciate the kind introduction. As you touched on, I have a strong financial background, especially on the municipal side. I've worked collaboratively with our school side and town and city before. I understand the importance of working collaboratively and leaning on the strengths of others that bring their experience to the table. I look forward to learning the role and learning to work with all of you as well. Thank you.
I should have said as well, both education and the public world are small worlds. And so what did we just connect that? Yes. Brian's wife you previously worked with Paul in North Andover, but also in my contacts and working with our contacts within our towns, Brian is known and very well respected. So that's comes with a very high recommendation. So certainly if anyone has any questions for him, or me, I suppose, but mostly him.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
Kyle, you will be missed.
Yes.
I'm just hoping that Brian knows all the HVAC, you know, how many turns of air and.
Bring him up to speed.
To Kyle's credit, Kyle didn't know about that, nor did anyone prior to COVID. So everyone learns on this job.
Linda.
I have something along the same lines. I just want to make sure that, I want to just say welcome as well. But did they all warn you about the bus texts and calls and emails in the morning?
I'm learning as we go.
So there may have been hurdles to clear as Brian was agreeing to come. Definitely the reputation of transportation and education, not just at Triton, certainly gave him pause. But that certainly, that is not something unique to Triton, obviously in the town of Wilmington as well. I'm dealing with the same issues, I think the same bus company. So.
Any other questions? Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
We will now go into, that's right, motion to authorize the superintendent of schools to execute the contract as drafted and proposed for the new director of finance and operations effective March 4th, 2024, or at a later mutually agreed date.
I'll make the motion.
Second?
Do you want to say any discussion? Any discussion?
Any discussion?
I have something. I just wanted to note, so we wrote there, so we are targeting March 4th. Obviously, Brian hasn't given his formal notice, nor should he, until,
Yeah, I haven't tendered a formal resignation. I've obviously notified the board that I work with. I've notified our manager, our department heads. Word travels quickly in my job as well. So it's not a secret over there. But we're still working on trying to figure out a succession plan in earnest, so.
so we're still going with the March 4th, subject to change if anything needed to change. I should also note, Kyle has been gracious, obviously he notified it. And so there will be a connection beyond March 4th. Kyle and Brian have met, and obviously there's going to be a transfer of knowledge prior to Kyle's official departure on February 23rd. But even after that, there will be lines of communication open so that we make sure that there's a successful transition, because there's a lot going on right now.
And we appreciate that, Kyle, that you're going to hold those open lines of communication.
Just a quick question. This is probably a Brian Forget question, now that we have to name which Brian we're talking about here. So if it is a longer term period, are we planning on using your SBO license to be covered for the district in having an SBO on site?
Yes.
Okay, just checking, making sure we had a
Yes.
plan. Thank you.
Glad I didn't let that lapse. But just until Brian gets here.
All those in favor of Brian's contract? Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you. Yeah, I'll be right over there.
The next item is the FY25 operating budget development. I will turn this over to Superintendent Brian Forget and Kyle.
So we are following up on last week's discussion, as well as the discussion that happened at the District Communications Committee last week when we left here. We talked about, was that just last week, where we said, let's just pump the brakes, we're going a little fast in identifying cuts on only the second, third week of January. So we do not have any other information to share with you tonight. I can tell you that we have certainly been doing lots of work internally, looking at the cuts that we originally proposed, and assessing additional cuts, other cuts. I heard loud and clear, we've had further discussion about concern about the sixth grade cut at Newbury and at Pine Grove that put those two classes or two schools with sections at the 25 mark. So those are two that we have certainly talked about coming back with when there's a target, given how we would arrive at that target. Certainly those two we're considering trading out for other reductions. But the hope for tonight is for you to have a conversation following up on what you heard from DCC, and then giving us a target. We are meeting tonight, and then we will meet again, right, one more time next Wednesday for a regular meeting. It's our regular monthly meeting plus have one more budget discussion, and then on Tuesday have that remote meeting on Tuesday the 13th to approve a tentative budget. So we need to be in pretty much the same page by the end of next week's meeting, or at least for you to be able to say, I like this, I don't like this. So the hope would be tonight to leave here with a sense of what is that target number, right? We had the green, I forget the last colors. We had the green, which represented, the green, the yellow, and blue, which represented, the green was our budget proposal with the reductions of 866 as we proposed them. So I think rather than, I know we had some discussions about reductions and people shared thoughts last week, but I think this week what would be helpful is for us to have a target number in where you're comfortable setting the high water mark. As a reminder, this is the high water mark, so we only come down from here. So we've made that promise to the towns that they can assume that this budget is the worst case scenario. Really the only other unknown that we have as far as expenditures is health insurance. We probably will receive that sometime between next week and the final vote. If we look kind of historically when we've received that confirmation, we're pushing to get it sooner. We'll see. But we can hope that's better. There's a chance, obviously, that that is a little worse. But that's really the only expenditure as far as that we're not really clear on. Revenues from the state in further calls. Mass Association of Regional Schools did a call the other day and had both Jay Sullivan and Rob O'Donnell on. The 80%, the transportation as it's listed right now in the budget, they believe is conservatively about 80%, bless you. The number that we have assumed level funding the current year is higher than 80%. So that's already a very aggressive revenue assumption. I believe the statement was made, and we know this from years past, Chapter 70, we are getting the minimum aid, so that likely will not change. That won't go backwards. Regional transportation is a place that historically the legislature is not unanimously supportive of, given that it's about a quarter of the state in districts that are impacted by regional transportation reimbursement. So it's an easy target. It has often been a target for reductions when they're needed. So that's a potential that could actually swing in another direction as far as regional transportation. We hope it stays at least where it is now. So yeah, any other adjustments? I don't think there's anything else. Yeah.
It really pretty, for this point in the year, feeling a little solidified.
Yeah, very solidified. I don't know if you want me to take an attempt. Several of you were at DCC last week. If you want me to attempt to summarize, hopefully those who weren't there had an opportunity to watch it. There was no formal recommendations given by towns, as how I would summarize it. We had an open discussion. There was obviously some impassioned, we can't make cuts discussion, and there was obviously some concern shared, varying by the towns as far as that overall number. My takeaway was the green box is a stretch, a big stretch. I don't think there was anyone around the table that said absolutely no, but it's a stretch, right? It will be a challenge for the towns. So I think that's how I would summarize it. And certainly would love to hear everyone's thoughts.
Does anybody would like? Well, I think it's great to have the DCC to have open communications with the town to see how they feel about the budget that we have. I think some of the select boards were very passionate about the schools. And some of the towns, everybody's concerned about what the budget's going to be. I will start with, I agree with the discussions we had here last week that we need to come in between the green and the yellow. So the 1A, I think, was what everyone around here had discussed. I think going below to the yellow or to the blue is not going to be beneficial to our district. I guess the cuts that you're thinking of maybe can be relooked at for, some of the ones that the people around the table here were most opposed to, which were the sixth grade teachers. Because I think that's going to have big challenges for those two schools. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say.
Yeah, I guess my expectation with our schedule was that there was a lot of listening and learning going on at the DCC meeting last week, and that since the next meeting is in very early February, they're going to have discussions with their boards and come back with a much more informed discussion, I would say, at the 8th, I think we meet again for DCC, right? Is it, I think it's...
The 8th, yeah.
Yeah,
The 8th.
yeah, the 8th. So that would be my expectation as well. I have definitely heard from some current fifth grade parents. I would say largely what I've heard is like they're watching. It's definitely a wait and see. No one's hitting a panic button yet, but there are definitely some concerns about individuals in that grade at Pine Grove and how it would be in a larger classroom, that I guess just feeling like there could be a greater chance of disruption in a larger classroom, larger size classroom if that came to being. So I don't know about that, I think, again, everybody's kind of in process mode right now, I would say, so I would expect all of that to become a little bit more loud as time goes on.
Who would like to go next? Anybody?
I guess I'm just going to reiterate that I think the STEM programming is extremely valuable. Cutting that program now, it would be gone. And I mean, Salisbury didn't have it at all this year. And no, Salisbury, right? Salisbury had half of it and Rowley didn't, sorry. And cutting it out of the budget for next year and then looking at next year negotiating a transportation contract, I don't think it's coming back for at least a couple of years. We also had been looking at rebuilding the elementary music programming, and so this programming that is now sort of off the table for the kids who are in, the upper elementary schools for the rest of their elementary career, if not the lower elementaries. And that STEM programming is, I think, really foundational, that it's programming that can't be captured in the classroom, and provides tremendous benefits across disciplines. I think that cutting the SEL program is similar in that the way that the world is changing, people have fewer interactions that are in person and dynamic, and learning how to interact better and more intentionally when you're younger is going to be more and more critical, because there's not going to be as many opportunities to learn that as people get older. So I'm reiterating my deep concern about cutting those two programs. I would not be in favor of any budget that doesn't have the STEM position in it, and I would want to have that debate at the table about the SEL position versus other cuts. And as Narissa said, those sixth grade class sizes get very large, and speaking to a family friend this week who's doing the debate about whether to stay in district or move to another school through a choice situation. I think, that sixth grade year is critical in terms of maintaining the strength of our elementary schools and their overall in versus out numbers.
Can you I feel like I got lost a little bit because I don't believe we've talked about music programming at all. And then I got lost because you were talking about it. Can you say it again?
In terms of last year, we had that music programming, right? And so we're saying this was programming we thought was important at the elementary schools, and now other programming that we think is important at the elementary schools coming out. It's just that many more things that we're going to probably want to come back, that cost money, that pulling.
So are you making the assumption that the elementary music program that was funded by a donation this year would not be funded by a donation?
I'm talking about
Sorry, confused.
last year, Brian was talking about adding staffing, perhaps.
Oh, okay, all right. So we're in last year's, okay.
I'm talking about
Okay,
the things
gotcha.
that we had, some of the things we had last year that we're not even talking
Okay.
about this year yet.
Gotcha.
So I think you had some.
I would just say I do think the concern you raised about the choice is a valid one, and I don't want to see us wind up in a situation where that becomes this, like gathering steam, more kids choice out, so we lose more money, so more kids choice out, and all of that. That's definitely a concern I've got. I'm agnostic about where the cuts come from, because I think cuts are painful. They're going to be painful, and it's hard to sit here and say who should feel that pain, I guess. I would say absent an absolute declaration of this is untenable, like under no circumstances can this budget go forward from the towns, I can't advocate cutting any more than that green. That green for me is like a bite my lip and vote for it. Going below that is, I can't imagine making steeper cuts than what we've already discussed.
Now we have to give the central office a target to shoot for. Paul had mentioned not going below the green. And I think last week we went with a 1A type consideration.
So 1A is the new 2,
Yeah.
right? Because originally it was we were calling that 2.5, it was 2 million, so the 2.25 is the 1A. And I guess just as a reminder, there's still unknowns, and this is your high water mark. I can tell you with what we've been talking about internally, right, we're preparing for deeper and where we would go with that. Obviously, we don't want to talk to people or talk to you about those cuts and what those mean, but, right, there's lots of papers in here about what that would mean to get to the yellow, to the blue, and even beyond. But I think at this point, we need a target from you as far as that high water mark for the tentative budget, knowing that there are some years where we do the tentative and we're like, all right, we feel done and we're done. This is a year that there probably will be some shifts between the tentative. And hopefully some of those shifts are medical comes in at 2.2 rather than 6, and it solves the problem for us. Hopefully.
If you're looking for the high water mark, this is the number we put out as the high water mark, the green. That was the number, correct?
We haven't talked, we haven't put out a high water mark. That green represents level services with the, right, the only other two additions are the continuing Chromebooks and the stabilization fund minus the 866,000 in reductions. So that has been discussed as kind of the top, but that hasn't been codified until you vote a tentative budget. It hasn't been set as the high water mark.
So I guess that's the question, is if we want to make that green box the high water mark.
So I'm just organizing my thoughts, but can you, this is what we brought to DC, this one, DCC. So that's the number our towns have seen, and there was support. They were, I will say that all the towns were fairly open in discussion. They weren't.
I would say there was an understanding of the needs.
There was an understanding of the needs. There was
Not
no
pleased
like
about the numbers.
outright,
Yep.
absolutely not. So for me, I would say then that green number should stay as the high water mark. It is one the towns have seen. They are understanding of the needs. It doesn't mean we can't work with the towns as they start to solidify like what they're looking for. But I'm not sure I feel comfortable giving a lower high water mark. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I think it's hard to give the scenario, the new scenario number 2, when we don't know what is going to be included or excluded as additional. What are you considering as additional cuts? Like, can't consciously sit here and say, yeah, I agree with this. I mean, yeah, that would be a better number, but at what cost? You know, what is it that's going to give? And we've got to be prepared to tell people what's going to give. The same way as we can explain what that green box means right now. If people ask us, we can say, this is what it means to you, this is what it means to your kids, this is what it means to you as teachers, right? But we can't tell them what that yellow box is.
And if you set that as a target, next week we'll come back and be able to give you that information to decide, for sure.
I think to Caitlin's point, if we give you that number, we're kind of already committing to whatever those cuts happen to be in some sense. I mean,
Yeah, no, you're not committing to anything until the tentative budget. So you could say, I want to see what that looks like to get to that 2.25, and then say no. We want to go back, and at that point, you would have itemized deductions, bad term, reductions of how to get to that. Right? I mean, I was kind of pushing, and then we kind of slowed down last week. We were going to come with more cuts, but if we're talking cuts, we have to talk to people, and then, right, the floodgates are opened. So last week, we decided we wanted to slow down and then just have another discussion tonight. So that's why we didn't bring a list of additional reductions to you tonight.
So I just wanted to jump on what Caitlin was saying as well. I walked away from the DCC meeting feeling at least we had a reasonable discussion. They understood that we had already made cuts in that green section, and that they were understanding of the fact that if we did anything else, that would mean a whole slew of additional things that would have to be wiped out that haven't been contemplated yet, or at least discussed around this table, and that we already know that there's a list of things that we're not backfilling for positions and things that we all feel are needed or that we would like to see in the schools, and that they, not saying that they felt comfortable, but they agreed that it was a place to start and that we needed to reach out and get the support of the citizens. So I don't feel comfortable moving below the green until we figure out whether or not it's feasible.
And yes, I don't disagree with that. I don't think there's a problem with that approach. I can tell you, as I noted, there are some reworking of those cuts that will come back next week if you say the green is the target. Again, it won't be dollar for dollar, but it'll be in that same ballpark. with some rethinking around specifically those two sixth grade sections at Newbury and Pine Grove. You look confused, Caitlin.
I'm not confused. I want to point out that in years past, we've been able to, and the reasons why this didn't happen, we've been able to hear from the principals, but we've also have received during that time like an update from the principals about how scores were going. We had, last year, they talked about behaviors, and so we had more to go on as a public meeting. Those are conversations you're having with your leadership team that we're not privy to, and that's, so for anyone kind of looking at this and thinking, well, we don't have the same information that we've had in years past because of the difference in the way we've done this process. So in years past, we've been able to like wants, needs, and then like must-dos. Without that, it's hard to kind of, when we get to this point, this is kind of why this conversation's so hard, because you're saying, well, give us the number and then we'll give you the information. But in years past, we've been able to see by school kind of where they all sat in different things. And then we've been able to be like, oh, well, as we have this conversation, because it's on paper, well, if you want this number, I mean, take a look at this page. And so these conversations are harder to have because I don't want to put a number out there into the community and have it sit out there for our towns and for our families, and then kind of ruminate in the world and then come back and be like, that's what this number means. I'm concerned about that, which is why I keep saying this is the number that's known and this is the number that has some facts to it. And any number we put up tonight lacks that, and it concerns me because that's how rumors start and that's how people get nervous and that's how people latch on to numbers. And then we're going to tell them what those numbers mean and it's going to cut. I just worry. So I'm not confused, I'm concerned about kind of how we're having conversations, but there's like a wall because we don't know what each school is like saying kind of outright. So giving a number is tough because we can't look back at paperwork and say like, oh, I remember Principal X said that this was a concern and they were working and they were kind of doing this, so that's why this is in their budget for us to kind of talk about.
I understand that. The difference is that was all about how we're going to spend new dollars, right? I can tell you,
And that's
if
why
all
I'm
five of the
not-
principals were right here, please don't cut anything,
And
right?
Yes.
So it's a different world.
Different animal, but
100%.
it makes this portion of the conversation
Difficult.
so much harder because when we've gotten to this point in the past, we've had all of that information and we've been able to actually speak, and it hasn't been, I'll go back to my team and then I'll come back to you guys and then we can have, so just for anyone watching at home that's kind of like, what, we're using the same information, which is why I think I'm hesitant to say like, oh yeah, you know what? Let's see what that number is, because I have nothing.
But again, if you're asking for information, it's so you can have that public discussion.
Yeah.
So if you say, I want to see what cutting to that $2 million figure looks like, it doesn't mean you're agreeing to anything. It means you're saying, I want to see what those are, how would you get there? How would you get to the 2? How would you get to the 2.25?
Well, I'm actually afraid of how you would get there. So
Fair.
I'm going to stay very firmly, the green makes me nervous. I'm very concerned about how you would get any lower than that. So I'm going to keep saying the green number, but just to clarify, in past, the conversations have been more robust because we've had more to pull from. And we've been able to kind of piece things together, whereas now it's like, I'm scared to look lower than 2.4.
Does anybody else have any comments?
I think for me, I'm going to reiterate what I said last week and say we're only a very short way into this process and we don't have a lot of information that I feel like we need to have to make informed decisions. I would look forward to having additional numbers for medical so that we kind of know where that sits. I would look forward to some additional discussions with the towns and kind of hearing a little bit more because again, I think, it's their representatives, right, that come to that meeting. So they're taking that back to their boards and then coming back and having a discussion at the table. And it's very likely, right? I mean, it's so hard because we're always in the middle, right? People always say it should be lower, and then others say you can't cut because there's value right there. So we're never going to please everyone, but I think until, it's all information is relevant when we're having these discussions. My inclination for right now would be to stay with the green, even going into the tentative budget on the 13th, and even say next week, like, we're not going to look any further. If the administration wants to suggest shifting things next week, I would totally understand that. I mean, we rely on you for your expertise on shifting cuts, what already exists in that green box, I guess. We rely on you for your expertise because we're not there day to day, and, as much as we can sit outside and maybe have some information, the reality is that we're not the ones that are dealing with the impacts. We can only hear what the impact, what the expectation of the impact would be. So
I guess what we're hearing from the committee is to stay with the green box until next week, and we can have more discussions with the towns at the DTC meeting to see if there's any other new information that we can share. Is everybody in agreement with that, the green box? Okay. Is there anything else that we would like to discuss?
No, sorry, I didn't realize my microphone wasn't on.
Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Can I ask a question before we do that about scheduling?
Certainly.
We're meeting again before the DCC meeting or after?
We're meeting
Wednesday.
next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, okay, thanks, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we have a school committee meeting February 7th at 7 PM. And then the DCC is Thursday at 6:30 in Newbury?
Can I just ask? Is there a reason we didn't do a budget workshop this year? Yes. And could we think about adding one? I just think it's a better place to discuss cuts, although it's public. Not that anyone wants to meet on a Saturday, but
it's not necessary, yeah. It wasn't about meeting, I mean, I can just say from Linda's and my discussion, it wasn't necessarily about meeting on a Saturday. It was it's not which direction do you want to head in. We were already headed in a direction out of necessity by the scenario we found ourselves in. And that was generally the workshop has been about what direction do you want to go in, and there was no choice this year. So I guess, could we add one to the schedule? There's no reason why we couldn't. But one of the reasons that we have that time set aside is because it's for a prolonged discussion, and even our regular meetings right now are not lasting anywhere close to their traditional duration. I mean, yeah, it's usually 8 to noon I mean, if you're done by 10, you're done by 10, but it's usually, a few hours of sitting there and discussing, like, where, if you have the funds, where would you put them? If you're going to reprioritize things, where's that reprioritization going to happen? And that's not the conversation that we're having this year.
But just thinking out loud, if after the DCC, we need to make more additional cuts, you could come to, it's basically the reverse of what we usually do, but you could throw out more cuts and we could discuss them at that time.
I know, but you can still we still have meetings that we can discuss them. That would still be public. We don't have to come in on a Saturday unless we're running short of time that we have to make discussions. But if he comes back next week with more cuts, we have another week that we can still discuss it.
Maybe I'm saying this wrong, but although it's public, it's not televised. And think there's more comfort in spitballing cuts instead of broadcasting them.
But we don't have a lot of wiggle room on what we're looking at this year as we have in the past. Like, sometimes we've had additional funding, so we're trying to figure out where that is going to go, and that's what we're talking about when Caitlin was the wants, must, needs, that sort of thing. So we would have those longer discussions around where are we going to spend the additional dollars. This year, we're looking at not even coming close to having to have those kinds of conversations. And we typically look at a number and we make recommendations to Brian about what we want it to look and how we want it to go, but he still comes back to us and say, hey, we want to do this instead, or you gave us the dollar amount, we think it's better suited here, and makes those recommendations to us.
I'm just talking about if he has to propose more cuts.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So you want to do it in reverse? Like in like the sense that same discussion, but instead of talking about where we want the money we have to go, you want to talk about
If it comes to that.
if it comes to that.
Hopefully it doesn't.
So you want to have, I get it.
I'm being realistic, like I
Yes,
think it
and-
might come to that.
So,
Instead of
yes.
on a Wednesday, throwing out people that are going to lose their jobs, coming and really having a discussion about where we want to make cuts. Because reality is it might come to that.
Yeah, and if anything, if anything that we're going to come to the table and propose, everyone's forewarned, right? That would be potentially impacted. I understand a workshop is less televised, so it feels less. People will be watching just as closely. So obviously that would preclude you from saying, hey, I think it should be this area, this person, this program, because we wouldn't have had the chance to warn that person. So word would travel slower, yes. It would travel, but it would travel slower. So yeah, I would say there's nothing precluding us, nor would you have to make that call tonight as a concept, right? I think as we go forward between February 13th and March 13th, anything's on the table as far as what you want to do to rethink. Everything has been different and backwards this year as far as the process. So there isn't a problem adding another meeting if that's what you all decided as a group.
But I think, just to make this clear, I don't think we should move from the green until after the next DCC meeting. That's my opinion.
I was just going to make the suggestion that if you have specific thoughts, open meeting law doesn't, there's no issue unless it's a quorum of people deliberating without a meeting. So there's no reason, if you have preferences, ideas, or things that you want to kind of roll out and then see what the reaction is, that you couldn't have a conversation with Brian and Kyle directly, or even Brian and Kyle and Linda directly. And just, I guess there's nothing that precludes that. If that's something you want to do, I don't think it needs to be the full committee. And in that case, there's no open meeting law violation.
I wish I had ideas. I don't. I want to hear Brian's ideas.
I thought you had a brainchild on how.
Believe me, if I did, he would already know. Brian would already know him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
Matt communicates very clearly and regularly with me, yes. I would know it. I appreciate that. But if you do have any thoughts, let me know.
So I just think we need to see what happens next week, and then we can decide as a committee whether we need a Saturday meeting. But I think we need to have this in open forum as often as we can, so that the people from at home can see how this budget is being developed. I'm not dismissing what you're saying, Matt, but with everything that's going on with this budget, everybody is on edge and wondering what's going to happen. So to not have them see how this works, especially when we don't have much wiggle room to decide what should stay and what shouldn't.
So, sorry, not to belabor this, but could you throw ideas out to us individually, and we could tell you personally what we think, and then you could have the conversation with the people, because I don't want you to have a conversation with someone you don't have to have.
Say that one more time?
Sorry.
So could I ping?
I'm talking way too much tonight.
I would say no, because I'm, in that scenario, I'm checking in with each of you, right? So I would have to, in essence, if I wouldn't bring the name, the person, the position, the program forward, if I know I didn't have a majority vote, I've just deliberated with each of you privately. So I think that's different than me sharing my opinion, Kyle sharing his opinion, our collective opinion, Brian, right, when he's involved. That's different. As soon as I start polling to get feedback, I think we've definitely run amok.
Okay, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
protect people.
Yeah, no, fair. That's absolutely. That is fair and appreciated. We don't need to create any more.
We definitely don't want to have any backdoor, people having the perception of backdoor type of conversations, because that won't go well.
No.
Not at all.
Thankfully, that is in the past.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any comments? I know this is a tough budget, but together we have to get through this and work together. And again, I always appreciate it. If no one, did you have a question or something?
I was just getting prepared for the original
Okay.
request for the
Can
motion.
I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Have a nice evening.